My name is Savannah Cole, and for most of my adult life, I believed that love was supposed to save you, protect you, build you up. I believed that because I grew up watching my parents work side by side, holding hands through every hardship. They were factory workers who came home every night covered in grease, but they always made time for dinner together, for Sunday mornings in the garden, for family. They taught me that loyalty was wealth, that your word was stronger than any contract. So when my father passed unexpectedly from a heart attack, and my mother followed just 8 months later after a short battle with cancer, the grief hit like a freight train. I was 29, young enough to still be figuring life out, but old enough to know what I'd just lost. My entire foundation had collapsed. But I wasn't alone, or so I thought. My husband, Dylan, was there every step of the way. He held my hand at the funeral, wiped my tears, and promised he'd take care of everything. "You don't have to go through this alone, Save," he whispered, voice thick with what I thought was love. "Let me carry the weight." Back then, I thought I had married a good man. Everyone else did too. He had that southern charisma that made people lean in when he spoke. He could sell you an umbrella in a drought, and you'd thank him for it. He'd worked construction when we first met, but by the time my parents passed, he was calling himself a property investor. Always talking about flipping houses, going big, creating generational wealth, as he put it. It sounded like a dream. He made me feel like we were building something together. When the will was read, I was stunned. My parents had left me everything. The house I grew up in, the small plot of land next to it, and a savings account I hadn't known existed. My brother, Charlie, had been estranged for years, and my parents had left him out. They trusted me to protect what they'd built. And I trusted Dylan. He told me he knew how to handle everything. He said we should move fast, flip the house, invest the money, build an empire. At the time, I was too deep in grief to argue, too tired to read the paperwork. I just signed what he put in front of me, thinking we were a team. "We're in this together, baby," he said one night as I signed a deed transfer. "Always," I replied. That was my first mistake. The money started moving fast. Too fast. First, the house was sold. He said it needed too many repairs and wasn't worth saving. Then the land. Then came the investments. A fixer-upper on the other side of town, a down payment on some shady development project with a friend of his I'd never met. Within 6 months, everything my parents left me was either gone or under Dylan's name. The final blow came on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was home early from work and happened to check the mail. A statement from a bank I didn't recognize was addressed to Dylan, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter said he defaulted on a private loan, secured against my parents' savings. I didn't even know he had access to that account. I rushed to the bank in a panic, hoping it was a mistake. It wasn't. The account had been drained. The manager told me it had been legally accessed by my husband, whose name, thanks to a document I vaguely remembered signing, was now listed as a joint owner. I stared at the computer screen, heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the words coming out of the banker's mouth. When I confronted Dylan that night, I expected at least a hint of remorse. I thought he'd lie. I thought he'd say he was trying to make us rich, that it was all for us. Instead, he laughed. He leaned back in his new leather chair, bought with my money, and said, "Savannah, it's just money. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for me pushing you to manage it smart." I stood there, stunned. "You stole everything my parents worked for. My home, Dylan. My mother's garden. You sold it like it was a used car." He rolled his eyes. "It was a liability. You're too sentimental. You wouldn't have done anything with it." That night, I slept in the guest room with my suitcase half-zipped. I stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand how the man I'd loved for 5 years had become this predator. But the truth is, he hadn't changed. He had always been this way. I just didn't want to see it. The next morning, I went back to the house I grew up in. It was already sold, but the new owners hadn't moved in yet. I stood in the backyard, staring at the spot where my mom used to grow tomatoes and basil, the spot where my dad would set up the old grill every 4th of July. I knelt in the dirt and cried like a child. That's when I realized something that changed everything. I had nothing left to lose. And when someone has nothing left to lose, they become dangerous. Dylan had taken everything I had, my inheritance, my home, my trust. But he made one critical mistake. He left me breathing. And I was going to make damn sure he lived to regret it. After the confrontation, the silence in our house was louder than any argument we ever had. Dylan didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He didn't even bother pretending. He just moved on like I was an inconvenience that had outlived its usefulness. The next few weeks were a blur of legal papers and sleepless nights. I filed for divorce, expecting some kind of justice, believing, naively, that the courts would see through him, that they'd realize I'd been manipulated, lied to, robbed. But I underestimated just how much Dylan had prepared for this. He came to court with signed documents, deed transfers, financial agreements, even a handwritten letter I barely remembered writing, giving him permission to manage the estate. He had receipts. Not literal ones, but trails of digital signatures and joint accounts that painted the picture of a willing partner. My lawyer, who I could barely afford, told me bluntly, "It's going to be tough to prove coercion without solid evidence. You signed. That's all the court cares about." When the judge read the final settlement, I felt my stomach drop. I got the car. Not even a nice one, just the 2009 Honda Civic that was technically mine before we got married. Everything else, the properties, the business accounts, even our dog, stayed with Dylan. I walked out of the courthouse with nothing but my purse, a folder full of legal jargon, and a burning hole where my future used to be. For the first time since I was a teenager, I had nowhere to go. I called my best friend, Tara, the kind of friend who shows up with food when you say you're fine and knows when to just sit in silence. She opened her apartment to me without hesitation. I slept on her couch, curled under a borrowed blanket, trying to make sense of what my life had become. Every morning, I got up early and worked double shifts at a diner in town. The tips were barely enough to keep gas in the car, but I didn't care. I needed something, anything to keep me from drowning. Nights were the worst. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, thinking about my parents, about how ashamed they'd be, about how I let Dylan manipulate me into signing away everything they had built. Every dollar, every inch of land, every dream they had for my future. It was all gone. One night, after a particularly brutal double shift, I took a long detour on the way home. I ended up on the other side of town, near the property Dylan had been bragging about for months. It was supposed to be his next big flip, a bar he claimed would dominate the nightlife scene. I parked across the street and stared at the building. It was a mess. Half the roof was caved in, the permit notice was sun-bleached and curling off the wall, and the windows were still boarded up. I couldn't help but laugh. This was what he'd stolen my inheritance for? But then I saw something that made me sit up straight. There was a for sale sign on the lot next door, with a bank's foreclosure notice attached. I got out of the car and walked closer. Dylan's company, Redstone Property Ventures, was listed as the previous owner. I took out my phone and started digging. Turns out Dylan's empire wasn't an empire at all. It was a house of cards. His LLC had been dissolved months ago due to failure to pay business taxes. Multiple contractors had sued him for non-payment. 3 of the properties he bragged about online had been foreclosed. He wasn't a mastermind. He was desperate. And that changed everything. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I plotted. I realized Dylan didn't just take my inheritance. He burned through it trying to look successful. He wanted the appearance of wealth more than the reality of it. And now, he was drowning. I could have exposed him. I could have gone online and told the world everything. But I didn't want a moment of petty revenge. I didn't want to scream into the void. I wanted something quieter, sharper. So I made a promise to myself. You're going to take it all back, Savannah. And when you do, you're not just getting even, you're building something better. The next morning, I started small. I called the bank listed on that foreclosure notice, asked questions, learned how liens worked, how properties changed hands. I went to the library and checked out books on business formation and real estate finance. I started taking free online classes at night on LegalZoom, Coursera, anywhere I could find them. While other people watched TV before bed, I studied. While Dylan posted filtered photos of himself in hard hats and designer boots, I was learning about quiet title actions, hard money loans, and tax deeds. I became obsessed. And slowly, things started to shift. A year after the divorce, I applied for a grant through a small nonprofit that helped women recovering from financial abuse. It wasn't much, just a few $1,000s, but it was enough to register my own LLC. Cole Holdings and Services. It didn't look like much on paper. But behind the name was a woman who had been broken, humiliated, left with nothing, and chose to fight back. At first, I helped small investors run background checks on properties. I'd flag red flags, permits that didn't exist, unpaid taxes, shady inspection records. Turns out I was really good at it, because I'd lived it. And then one day, while researching a listing for a client, I came across a property Dylan had once bragged about owning. It was up for auction. Starting bid, $7,000. I couldn't believe it. The same property he once said would make us millionaires? Reduced to pennies on the dollar? I didn't hesitate. I used my client commission checks and every saved penny and placed the bid. No one else showed up. It was mine. And that, right there, was the first brick in my revenge. I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I just stood in the middle of that broken-down bar with peeling wallpaper and cracked tiles and whispered to myself, "You took everything from me, Dylan. But you forgot. I watched you do it. I learned from you. And now, I'm going to beat you at your own game." The night I won the auction for Dylan's abandoned bar, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was wired. Every cell in my body was on fire. It wasn't just about a broken-down building. It was about taking the first piece back. The same bar he sold me on as our future. The one he gutted my parents' inheritance for. The one that, just 2 years ago, he toasted to with whiskey and lies. Now it was mine. And I paid less for it than he did for our wedding photographer. Still, I knew better than to celebrate too early. One auction win didn't make me powerful. It just meant I was playing now. And the game? The game was long. But I had patience. I had fuel. And more than anything, I had rage. For the next year, I worked like a woman possessed. By day, I expanded my services, property audits, asset searches, consulting for women going through divorces. I helped them find the financial red flags they'd been blind to. Some clients came to me with nothing more than a gut feeling, and I'd uncover unpaid debts, hidden accounts, forged documents. It was more than work. It was therapy. By night, I renovated the bar, slowly, carefully. I partnered with a retired contractor named Lori, who took me under her wing after hearing my story. "I've seen men like that ruin good women for sport," she told me, patting my shoulder. "But you're not just surviving, you're rebuilding." We didn't rush the repairs. Every brick I laid, every inch I painted, felt like sewing up a wound. Not just the buildings, but mine, too. And all the while, I kept tabs on Dylan. Social media made it easy. He posted everything: photos and rented sports cars, fake blueprints, blurry selfies with investors who looked more like poker buddies. But I saw the cracks. One by one, the properties he bragged about began to fall into foreclosure. I pulled public records. The debts were climbing fast. Contractors filed liens. Tenants complained online. And that big development deal he used to talk about? It was never real. Just smoke and mirrors. Still, he played the role until the curtain fell. It happened one humid July morning. I was at the county office, researching an old listing when I noticed something odd. A bundle sale had just been posted. 5 properties under Redstone Property Ventures were going to auction. Apparently, Dylan had defaulted on a massive loan. And since he used the properties as collateral, he was about to lose them all. The name on the auction notice sent a shiver down my spine. D. Cole. For a split second, I thought it was a mistake. But it wasn't. It was fate. The properties weren't glamorous. Just tired duplexes and one tiny strip mall on the edge of town. But I didn't care. These were the same properties Dylan used to wave in my face like trophies, symbols of his empire. I wanted every last one. I pulled every string I had, clients, friends, Lori. We pooled money, called in favors, bartered labor. And when the auction day came, I stood quietly in the back of the room while the man who took everything from me lost it all in 37 minutes. I walked out of that courthouse with the deeds in hand. And Dylan? He wasn't even there. He was too busy posting a throwback photo on Instagram with a caption about "the grind never stops." A week later, I got a call. It was Dylan. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly 2 years. Just seeing his name on my screen made my stomach tighten. Save?
Hey.
I heard a rumor you bought the strip mall. His voice was casual, but nervous. Is that true? I smiled. It is. Among other things. Silence. Then,
Damn.
you really got serious about real estate, huh?
I didn't say anything.
Listen, he continued, there's actually something I was gonna pitch. A bar concept. I've got the designs, the branding, I just need a space. I figured, maybe we could talk.
I almost laughed.
He had no idea. No idea that he was asking to rent from me. No idea that the landlord whose name was on his new lease application, S. Cole Enterprises, was me. I kept my voice even. Why don't you send me the proposal? I'll look it over. 3 weeks later, he showed up to a meeting in one of the office units he once owned. Now, it was my new headquarters, painted a soft blue, with gold lettering that read, Cole Property and Recovery Services. He didn't recognize it at first. Not until he saw the photo on the wall, me, my parents, and the family house he sold without blinking. His face paled. Wait, this is your company? I nodded. It is. And this building? Also mine. He stammered. Tried to recover. Well, I guess that means you're open to negotiating. I looked him in the eye, my voice calm. I'm not interested in negotiating, Dylan. I'm not interested in helping you rebuild anything. I just wanted you to see it. See what? I smiled slowly. What it looks like when someone takes what you destroyed and makes it stronger. That was the last time I saw him. Dylan moved out of state not long after. I heard rumors. He filed bankruptcy, tried to start another business, failed again. I didn't chase them down. I was too busy building. The bar I'd rebuilt became a community space, events, fundraisers, even a free legal clinic on weekends for women in financial abuse situations. I named it The Inheritance. Because what Dylan never understood was this. What my parents left me wasn't just money. It was resilience. It was roots. It was the strength to rise again. And now it was mine. A year after I bought Dylan's last property out from under him, I stood outside the bar I'd rebuilt from the ground up, The Inheritance, watching the late spring sun spill over its fresh navy and gold sign. The brick walls had been power washed, the roof replaced, and the once boarded windows now gleamed with soft light from the pendant fixtures inside. What once was a graveyard of broken dreams had become the heartbeat of the neighborhood. Inside, people laughed over wine tastings, held open mic nights, and celebrated small wins, new jobs, first birthdays, graduation parties. We hosted a free community dinner every Sunday, no questions asked. And upstairs, I'd built a quiet office space where I ran my consulting firm, helping women recover, rebuild, and reclaim their financial power. It wasn't just a bar. It was a beacon. And I had done it without him. It wasn't always easy. There were nights I doubted myself, days when old trauma whispered that maybe I wasn't meant for more. That maybe I was just the girl who'd once been too blind to see the lies she was sleeping next to. But then I'd think about my mom's voice when she used to tuck me in. You come from people who build, not people who beg. And I remembered, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. One quiet Tuesday, I got a letter. It was from a woman named Kelsey, living in South Carolina. She'd found me through a podcast where I'd anonymously shared my story. Her words were raw. I read what happened to you, and it felt like someone had written my life. I'm married to someone who controls all our finances. I signed things I didn't understand. I'm scared. I don't know where to start. I called her the next day. We talked for 3 hours. That same week, I created a fund, the Second Start Grant, to help women in her position. It wasn't much at first, but little by little, the donations came in. Clients gave. Friends contributed. We built a legal network of pro bono lawyers and trauma-informed financial planners. I knew now that my real revenge wasn't in taking Dylan's buildings. It was in making sure no one else had to climb out of that kind of hole alone. Months later, I ran into Dylan again. I was leaving a real estate investors conference at a hotel downtown. He was in the lobby, head down, pacing with a phone pressed to his ear. His hair was thinner, his button-down wrinkled. His voice was sharp, anxious. He didn't see me at first. But when he did, when our eyes finally met, he froze. There was no anger left in me. No rage. Just a quiet recognition of how far I'd come. He approached hesitantly. Savannah. I nodded politely. Dylan. You look successful. I smiled. I am. He looked away, uncomfortable. I messed up. I really did. There was something hollow in his voice, like someone who finally realized the empire he'd built was made of other people's trust, and that trust doesn't come back once you burn it. I didn't think you'd actually come out of it stronger. I shrugged. That's because you never really knew me. You thought I was easy to break. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but I stepped past him. Take care of yourself, Dylan. And that was it. No dramatic monologue. No grand confrontation. Just closure. Back at the inheritance that night, we hosted a fundraiser for the grant program. The bar was full of laughter and clinking glasses, and I stood on stage to say a few words. I told them the truth. That I wasn't always this woman in heels and confidence. That I once cried myself to sleep on a friend's couch, ashamed and lost and nearly broken. That I almost gave up. But I decided something. I told a room. If someone could tear me down with lies, I could build myself back up with truth. If someone could steal my inheritance, I could build my own legacy. They clapped. Some stood. Some cried. And I looked around at what I'd created, not just the walls or the drinks or the income, but the community, the movement, the safety net I'd become part of. This was more than revenge. This was resurrection. Today, I'm not the girl whose ex-husband stole her inheritance. I'm the founder of a business, a community leader, a mentor. My name is Savannah Cole. And I took back everything that was mine, not just the money, but the power, the dignity, and the future he tried to erase. And I didn't just leave him broke. I left him behind. For good. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Your support means everything. If this story touched you or made you think, please subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful stories.